Okay, hello, and welcome to this eSchool News webinar, Reverse Low Math Scores with a Neuroscience Approach. My name is Kevin Hogan. I am the Content Director for eSchool News, and I'm happy you are joining us today for what I know will be a very insightful and important conversation. This event is brought to you by Mind Education. Mind engages, motivates, and challenges students towards mathematical success through its mission to mathematically equip all students to solve the world's most challenging problems. The company is the creator of Math Puzzle Talks, ST Math, and Insight Math. So before we get to our conversation, I'd like to take a minute to go over some of the features of the platform that we're using for this webinar. I'm sure you're all quite familiar with it. This event is being recorded, so you don't have to worry about missing a thing. Within a few days, you'll receive an email message that contains a link to the recorded webinar, along with the PDF of the slides. And if you have a question or a comment for Nigel or me, there is a chat function that you can launch. Also, feel free to use this feature to contact someone from the eSchool News team if you have a technical question. So with these housekeeping items out of the way, let's get started with our conversation and some introductions. With me today is Nigel Nesbitt. He is the Vice President of Content Creation for Mind Education. Nigel is a passionate believer in the power of all students to learn mathematics. As the VP of Content Creation at Mind Education, he devotes his time to building engaging, interactive, and completely visual games that teach all students how math really works. Nigel's guidance of gameplay within ST Math and Insight Math helps ensure all students are mathematically equipped to solve the world's most challenging problems. He has a Bachelor of Science in Mathematics from Queen Mary University, University of London. He also earned a Master's in Education Administration at California State University, Northridge. Nigel, always a pleasure to speak with you, and thanks for joining us this afternoon.
Well, thank you, Kevin. No problem at all. Thank you very much. Delighted to be here. So thank you.
And I guess we could probably start at 40,000 feet and then drop right in.
Sure, bring it in a little bit. Yeah, that's fine.
into the nitty gritty. Well, maybe you could talk a little bit. I know our readership and folks who listen in here are always hearing about various methods and methodologies and tactics and strategies, especially when it comes to the challenges of math in public education here in the States. Maybe you could just set the table for us here a little bit. You know, how does the neuroscience approach that you folks are deep into differ from traditional teaching methods that we might hear about, from other places?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of ways of thinking about it, and obviously a lot of people will probably be, have heard all kinds of little neuroscience results. There's always some interesting sort of snippets that appear about sort of like, oh, if you do this, it'll help increase kids' memory times, and all, there's always some random information out there. And that's not really what we're talking about. We're talking about something much, again, you spoke about 40,000 feet, but a bigger picture perspective on kind of learning and teaching and all that kind of stuff. And I think actually I will dive in and share a slide right now, and we can always come back and just chat for a second. But I think for me, this was a huge moment. And I know you're looking at the screen saying, well, there's 4 words on the screen. What's so big about that? And the big deal was I taught high school mathematics here in the US. I taught at Van Nuys Senior High School in Los Angeles. And I also worked for Los Angeles Unified as math director for a while. And, throughout that whole period, I loved being in the classroom. It was engaging, exciting. I found it a whole lot of fun. But I'm constantly trying to think, how do I teach? How do I teach better? And then when I worked at the district level, I obviously worked with coaches, trained coaches, did a whole lot of that kind of stuff. And again, this was the question that was fundamentally sort of occupying my time, and a lot of districts are thinking about this. How can we teach? How can we change our teaching practices? How can we improve? How can we do better? And what I realized eventually was, this is a great question, but there is a fundamentally better question that once you ask it, changes everything. And when I'm talking about a neuroscience approach, It really is this flip from, instead of asking, how do we teach, asking, how do we learn? And once you kind of flip that paradigm and stop thinking so much about, okay, what am I doing? How can I do this better? How can I explain something better? All of which is great stuff. It's good to think about. But you start thinking about, okay, what does learning actually look like? What mechanisms are there for sort of, for us to learn? And it turns out that a lot of our assumptions about how we think learning happens are actually not right. And there are better ways of doing things. And I'm going to ask you to be a guinea pig in a minute, Kevin, and actually kind of go with me in a little bit and kind of dive into that. But I just want to, again, set a little scene here. One of the big challenges we have is we think very often, especially with math and a lot of other subjects as well, we kind of think about the stuff that we want kids to learn as like a list, right? We have lists of standards, we have many, many lists, we have textbooks with lists of chapters and lists of sections. And we kind of think, right, if I can make sure that I teach everything on the list, then we got to be good to go, right? Like they're going to be tested on this list of stuff. I make sure I get through this list. I cover everything on the list. I've explained it brilliantly. The kids have received it all. They've practiced everything on the list. Surely we're good to go. And the issue here, from a neuroscience point of view, is that while we think information sort of works being organized as lists, maybe we have some idea that perhaps our brains store this information kind of like a library with some sort of index accessible list. That is just not how our brains work. Our brains don't store information as lists. They store information as kind of a web. We create these neural networks in our mind, and the way that we literally store information is to make connections between ideas. And the number of those connections, the strength of those connections is kind of the depth of our understanding, right? So when we say, oh, somebody really understands mathematics conceptually and deeply, it means they have a lot of connections between all these ideas. So it's not so much a question of teaching all these ideas in isolation. It's how can we teach in such a way that builds a web?
Yeah.
And so when I'm talking about sort of the difference between, say, a neuroscientific approach and often a more traditional approach, this is one of the fundamental differences here. This is not about some sort of like, synapse measuring sort of delay speed type of thing. It's saying, no, you know what? Fundamentally, the way that we organize our teaching, organize our learning can be shifted to focus
Yeah.
more on connection versus things. So I'm going to stop sharing and then the guinea pig stuff can come in a minute, but
Yeah.
we
Well,
can
but
chat a
kind of
little
in
bit
that,
about it.
in the spirit of what you're talking about, maybe we can pull up our poll question to kind of engage our audience here a little bit,
Absolutely.
get a
Perfect.
little
Yeah,
bit
yeah, yeah.
of where they are when it comes to our topic here. And when so as an audience member, what challenges do you have changing to the idea of a neuroscience, what Nigel has just spoken about, that neuroscience instructional approach? You can see the various answers you have there. And I know, you talk about, and we are going to get into that as we drop from 40,000 to 20,000 to boots on the ground. This all sounds really great in concept, right? And in terms of theory. But what about on 9:30 on Tuesday morning when you have 30 kids in front of
Yep.
you and you're starting to contemplate the difference? You might even be contemplating your career decisions as much as you are the teaching methodologies that you're about to employ, right? So yeah, let's give the folks a couple more minutes or a couple more
Sure.
seconds actually to answer this question, and maybe you can talk about that a little bit and talk a little bit about going from that, what this means in a day-to-day experience for educators.
Without a doubt. I mean, this is, at the end of the day, teaching is hard. Teaching is a challenging thing to do. I love that you mentioned that sort of, hey, it's Tuesday morning and you got to stand there in front of this classroom and you're it, right? Suddenly you're there. And I mean, I vividly remember that feeling of kind of, especially early on. I started teaching at Van Nuys probably 25 years ago almost. And, when I began, it's a struggle. You're standing there going, oh my God, what on earth do I do? And you know, and you hear these ideas, you think, okay, well, great, I'd like to try this. And the big challenge here is maybe you try something and it doesn't work so well. Maybe you hear that, oh, I hear that, you know, mathematical discourse is great. Kids should be talking. Okay, let me see how that goes. And they start talking, but they, you know, veer wildly off into something completely different and you can't get control back. It's not easy to do these things.
Yeah.
And that I think has been a big focus then. I guess I've had, if you like, to be very flashy about it, but two foci of the sort of the different sort of works that I've done, both even when I was in the classroom, out of the classroom, and then since I've been at Mind Education, has really been focused in two areas. One is, okay, building content that students can interact with in a way that can hopefully, you know, sort of build their conceptual understanding. But then also this second question of how do we provide tools and make this process a little easier for teachers to get started doing some of this stuff, because it is difficult. And I think that's a big piece of this challenge, is that, yeah, some of this stuff sounds really, really good at 30,000 feet. But once you start getting closer to the action, it's not immediately obvious what that means or what it looks like or how it's easy to do. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but certainly a comment coming in from the audience that so many people think that math is literal. While it absolutely is at its base, it is very conceptual in its application, that most math teachers can't even explain that or apply it. And so the ultimate question is, what am I ever going to use algebra for, right?
Absolutely. Oh yes. Oh yes. Now I'll get to the answer. I have a great answer for that question, but we can maybe wrap that up a little bit at the end there about the, you know, sort of why. It's almost like, why are we learning this?
Yeah.
But yeah, and some of the other resources we've got towards the end, I think, delve into that a little. There's a whole podcast just in that question by itself. That's a whole thing. It's a whole other thing, and we'll get there. But yeah, I mean, I really like that thought as well, this whole notion that we do tend to treat mathematics way too literally. We get hung up on the minutiae of these things and totally lose sight of what it is, which is ultimately a system of thought that allows us to make sense of really challenging stuff in the world around us. And losing sight of that and getting just lost in these like minute details means, again, that we stop focusing on the connections and we just focus on the nodes, right? And that's the problem, is that so much of our educational process just focuses on building out these nodes in isolation. And we need to figure out, how do we get kids to build a web, right? How do we get them to get that connected understanding? So, okay, you ready to play guinea pig for me a little bit?
I'll do my best. I'll do my best. We'll
Oh, I
see.
don't know if we have the poll questions. I
Oh yeah,
haven't
well, yeah,
seen
the
them.
poll questions did come out, and it's pretty much evenly divided amongst
Okay.
challenges. You know, just understanding
Okay,
what it is to
cool.
begin with. You know, and then the guidance on getting started and getting teachers ready to teach. The
Cool.
existing curriculum doesn't support it, but yeah, those top three really kind of evenly split
Okay,
around. So
perfect. So I
yeah,
think we'll then look at a little bit of an answer to each of those, right? Some of
great.
it will be kind of like, hey, this is going a little bit more deeply into, this is what it is, here's what we kind of mean. And then some of the teasing out of, here's some ways of thinking about this, here's some tools that can help get started. And also here's just some ways of thinking about stuff that can help you get started or drive down that and kind of go. So, all right, so I'm going to share my screen again. Um, and let's see. All right. Okay. So let's see. So yeah, this is ultimately what we're about, and this, you know, is a sort of neurosciencey word, but it just basically means connected ideas. This notion of schema, right? This notion that in your brain you have these webs, you have these connected ideas. We call them schema, and these are usable. These are things that your brain actually uses, and we're going to see how it uses those in a minute. So I'll come back to that later on. All right, here we go. So This I saw for the first time 15 years ago. I walked into a classroom in South Central Los Angeles, and as a high school math teacher, I walked into a room and saw 42 kids in a sixth grade classroom actually playing a game with a penguin. And my initial thought was, oh my gosh, they're playing some game with a penguin. What on earth are they doing? But then I looked at what they had to actually do, and I saw the thinking involved, and I saw the sort of cross connections being made. And this was a big part of that changing journey for me of shifting from, oh, I've been thinking about how do we teach, and really I need to be thinking about how do we learn. So for me, seeing this for the first time 15 years ago kind of was a big piece of this. So this is a game. So Kevin, there's a penguin. This penguin's name is Gigi. And as you can see right now, Gigi's feet, I don't know if I do what I do with my hands to make it the same way as for you to see this. Anyway, Gigi's feet are kind of pointing at you, right? And Gigi's kind
Yes.
of rolled onto his or her side. Gigi wants to get across the screen. That's all we need to know. You'll notice there are no words, there's no instructions here, nothing. We need to get Gigi across the screen. So I'm going to ask you first, how many moves do you think you get to make?
I would guess 3.
Okay, perfect. Excellent. We are off to a winning start. This is great. All right, fantastic. So, and yeah, so notice it is not necessary to tell. It is not necessary to have instructions. And again, one of the big shifts here, we talk and hear a lot about productive struggle, about telling less and allowing students to discover more. One of from a neuroscience point of view, what we're talking about, building connections and building webs, when you let students actually figure stuff out for themselves, that is when they make connections. So connections in the brain are very much made when kids are the ones who are kind of having those aha moments. So removing instructions, not feeling the need to tell everything, but, and this is where obviously design plays a big feature here, making it sort of that the user or the person who's figuring stuff out can see, okay, I get to make 3 moves. No one needs to tell me that. I figured it out. You're already starting this process of somebody making connections. So the moves are these things across the bottom of the screen, right? We can call them, let's call them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6.
Yeah.
And I'm more than happy if people want to stick stuff in the chat as well. We can see what,
To
except
help
I
me.
can't see Spanish. So yes, yes, absolutely, Kevin. So let's just go. There's actually 16 different ways of solving this puzzle. So no worries whatsoever. There's all sorts of different ways of doing this. We got to figure out how to get Gigi across the screen. We got 3 moves to make. I will tell you, this is something we can get kindergarten students to solve. So don't feel any pressure today whatsoever about being on a national webinar in front of everyone trying to solve a kindergarten problem. So there we go. All right. But you'll see, it is actually a very safe environment. And that's another key part about making connections, is creating an environment that for the student feels really safe to explore. All right, so hit me with a move. Give me something, just 1 through 6. Give me some moves that you think might be working here.
I think I'm going to put Gigi upright with number 6.
Okay, fantastic. All right, so we'll go with that. Lovely. And so, oh, I think I've just found where my chat window is hiding, because I see that 3 people have entered something. Oh, except some real 4. Hang on. Let's see if there's any advances on 6. All right, let's see here.
And it's not cheating; it's collaboration. When I go with what the
Collaboration,
folks in the chat
absolutely.
are saying.
Okay, all right. I see a couple of interesting ones there. Okay, we'll see. We'll come back to those. But you've gone with 6, so I will tell you right now, this is a totally valid starting move. In fact, any one of these moves could be used to start this. This isn't the way most people see it, and I see in the chat that a lot of other people are seeing it a different way, which we'll come back to, which is the more normal way of seeing it, but you've gone a different way, which I love. So this is great. All right, so we've gone with 6. What do we want to do?
Does this have anything to do
next?
with me being left-handed, Nigel? Like it being in my right mind or anything?
It might do. This is pure spatial reasoning. This is just a pure spatial.
Well, then I would, so I would then go with number 3. I think, to kind of turn Gigi to the left.
Okay. Yep. Okay. And then what do you want to do to bring us on the home stretch here? Let's see.
Well, then I mean, in my mind, they're ready to kind of march to the right. No,
Okay.
um, can I do it in two steps, or does it need to be three?
It needs to be three.
All right, this, that, and then one.
Let's try it and see what happens. So this is the beauty of it here, right? So notice you didn't get to, while you were making your prediction, you had to make the entire prediction, and then we'll get to kind of see how it plays out.
Right. So
And
it didn't let me. It didn't go forward with
right,
each step. Right.
right. Now there are modes where we can do that. And to be fair, I will tell you a little secret. We don't hit kindergarten kids with a 3-move puzzle first up. Right? They start where they have to make one rotation, and then
Yeah.
we build to two, we build to three. So you know you got dropped in the deep end. That's just how it is. But all right, so now we can see like what happens, and it may be, of course, that the way this is going to work is just different from how you thought, which is totally fine
Sure.
because we'll see. Okay, there's one move, there's another, and there's another. And we can kind of go back and let's just take a little look. And it could be that you were just thinking it would move a totally different way, which is completely
Yeah.
fine. But now, notice you can see like, oh, okay, that's what's happening. Oh, I get it. It's kind of going like this. And now
Yeah.
notice we got
Yeah.
this wrong. But the only thing that happened was it went back to the start and we get to do it again. So this ability, and again, this feeds absolutely into this notion of making connections. We make connections when we're doing something ourselves, when we're figuring something out, when we have those moments where we go, oh, you want to hear that a lot in the classroom. You want to hear kids going, oh, I got it. Those moments are key. And a safe space where, hey, I got it wrong, but you know what? I didn't somehow lose a percentage and have to go, whatever. It's like, okay, I get to try it
Yeah.
again. So now that you've seen it once, do you want to give it a different spin here?
Yes. So now spin is the operative word, I think, right?
Yes.
Um,
Yeah,
um,
absolutely.
let's go with number three.
Three.
And then we'll turn Gigi upright with number one.
Okay.
And then
Okay.
I'm gonna go with Amy, our number five.
Number five. Okay. I got a good feeling about the way you went towards the end there. I think Amy's advice may have been pretty bang on. So let's check it out and see. Three, one. Oh, yes. Oh,
Yes,
look at that. Very nice. All right, fantastic. Lovely.
thank you,
So
Amy.
obviously time is going to get away from us really quickly at this rate. So I
Yeah.
do want to kind of, otherwise I would happily go back and try out. There are a lot of people there that put in, I think 2-3-3. That is a totally valid move sequence. Absolutely. That's the way that a lot of people see this. I love the fact that we went a totally different way and that we got it wrong and then got it right, because all of that really speaks to this fundamental idea of what we call the perception action cycle. And this is one of, there are many learning mechanisms in our brains, but this is one of the sort of most important. This is almost the and this has got nothing to do with mind education. This is not sort of a mind thing. This is just a well understood sort of neuroscientific mechanism in our brains, if you like, or neuroscience is the thing that allows us to understand how this mechanism works. And one of the key features here is this is not something that only some students can do, right? This is not like a, oh, some kids use the perception action cycle. No, all mammals use the perception action cycle on a daily basis, thousands of times a day, even seventh graders. And I say that in the knowledge that my son has just moved from seventh into eighth grade, so is no longer a seventh grader, which is definitely middle school teachers. You have my sympathies. It is definitely the toughest part to be working in. But even seventh graders use the perception action cycle. And when I speak to this, you'll recognize it and you'll think of it in terms of that last game we played. This is a learning mechanism we use all the time, and it's very much the science of learning by doing. And it works a little bit like this. Whenever you're confronted with a problem, doesn't matter what that is, you're going to basically use whatever schema you have to make a prediction. And this is just what you were doing just then, Kevin. You were using your spatial reasoning schema to make a prediction about what you thought might work, right? And then based upon that prediction, you take an action. There's an outcome. In this case, it's in a game. It doesn't have to be. It could be whatever outcome it might be, whatever you're doing. And you perceive that outcome, goes into your brain. And in the brain, we have a little thing called the hippocampus. And in the hippocampus, we have a feedback loop built into our heads. And basically what's going to happen, if our prediction is correct, like if what we thought was going to happen actually happens, then our hippocampus sends out this chemical and it makes our connections in our brains stronger. It floods the schema that fired up and sort of won the race to make your prediction gets made even stronger. So basically ideas that you have that work get strengthened. And similarly, and very importantly, if you tried something and it didn't work, and especially if that sort of happens repeatedly, basically your hippocampus is going to send a very different chemical out, and it's going to send out a chemical that's going to kind of deprioritize the schema that you had that was wrong. So if you have a misconception about something, the best way to get a kid to address a misconception is not to tell them that they're wrong, but is to allow them to use that misconception and then see for themselves repeatedly that it just doesn't work. And gradually, their brains will naturally start dampening down that idea. So we have this mechanism built in. It's part of our sort of mammalian heritage, if you like. It's a major survival technique. And none of this comes to play when we are sitting in rows, listening to somebody telling us what to do, writing it down. At that point, our perception action cycle is basically sort of helping us to learn, oh my God, this is boring. When can I get out of here, right? That's kind of what the unintended consequence of learning at that moment. So for this to kick in, kids have to be making predictions. So if there's one thing that people take away from this has got nothing to do with ST Math, nothing to do with Insight Math or Puzzle Talks or any of it. If it's something that you want to take away to your classroom practice and go, okay, what can I do tomorrow that is going to change? And you can do it in small ways, right? It could just be, even if you're still having a sort of classroom discussion where you're kind of driving the bus, just giving time and space for kids to be making predictions before you tell them everything. That's a good start. And then obviously just trying to expand that. It's like, okay, now can I give kids a chance to make predictions about something? Maybe we're giving them some tools, some manipulatives, or something they can use to assist that predictive process before I tell them anything, right? But can I sort of, but giving kids a chance to make predictions and then very critically get some feedback quickly on that prediction. Like it's not, sort of making a prediction on my homework, turning it in, and then it comes back graded over the weekend 3 days later. Perception action cycle is not going to still be working, right? It doesn't work over that kind of time frame. This is like, I've made a prediction. I think it's this. Is oh, I see. Oh, it didn't quite work because it went too far. It went too, whatever. That is the time frame we're talking about. So this notion that, God, we could change a lot if we just back up enough to give kids the chance to enter into that space where they're trying to make predictions about stuff. That's a big piece of what we're trying to do in terms of like, there's an instructional shift, if you like. And one of the tools we have to help people, and this is not a purchase thing, this is just a process that we have information about and so forth and so on, is this thing we call the problem solving process. So this is about how can you take that and now bring this into the classroom? How can you take that perception action cycle and make it actionable, if you like, in the classroom process? Now, we use this as a sort of underpinning of a lot of our design of classroom sort of moments and tools and things like that. But this is usable completely. You could use this and implement any task, right? You could go to Joe Bowler's website and get tasks from YouCubed or whatever, and you could use this process as a way of kind of, okay, here's how I would actually implement this and give kids a chance to use that perception action cycle. So you're going to give them a little bit of time to kind of look at it, notice, wonder. Don't just have them start writing and doing. Give them a minute, back it up. Like, what do you think? What do you think might happen? Give them a chance to just slow down a little bit. Then give them a chance to make predictions. give them some opportunity to test and observe their outcomes. And then from that, we're going to analyze the outcomes, right? And whatever, whatever the task might be. And then basically either we're going to loop around this process. So obviously, if it didn't work, we're going to analyze what did we do? Was it too big? Was it too small? Was it too much? Was it too little? What did we think we might have done wrong? Let's try it again. And we're going to go round this loop. So here's that perception action cycle looping around and seeing what happens. And then once we're kind of like, oh, okay, we finally figured this out. We kind of got somewhere. Okay, how does this now connect to other stuff we know, and how can we extend this learning? So this process is something that teachers can use in any context, and to be honest, almost in any subject, to sort of engage students and know that by doing this perception action cycle, this neuroscientific kind of core of learning, or one of very critical core of the learning process, is going to be active when kids are going around this loop. So yeah, so let me stop sharing for a second, Kevin. We'll come back and chat for a bit, and then we can talk a little bit more about some specifics. I'm just curious if there's
the key phrase that keeps coming up to me, not only going through the game, but also just following your presentation there, is the idea of engagement, right? I mean, especially with middle schoolers.
Yes.
And it seems that I didn't see any mathematical symbols. I didn't see a times table matrix. I didn't see any sort of other symbology, which when I was back in 6th grade immediately sent me scurrying into the recesses of my mind.
For the hill.
I'm actually looking on how to just spin a penguin around, right? So I mean, can you take me from the spinning penguin to where I think a lot of our audience members are saying, again, this all sounds great, but I've got to meet my state standards test in 9 weeks. How do I go from there to there?
All right, fantastic question. Thanks, Kevin. That is, I'm going to share again, actually, then in that case, because you're asking the questions that are just driving the bus down this channel. So, so yeah, I mean, that's a very, very good question. So it's like, great, okay, spatial reasoning, spinning penguins, that's great. We can see this value in that thinking process, but it's like, okay, here's my standard, like, what the heck, how does that match that? And it doesn't, right? So it's like, okay, so, and obviously this is something that we have spent a lot of time delving into. So the origins of ST math, the ST stands for spatial temporal, and grew out of neuroscience research at University of California, Irvine. And the initial games were pure spatial reasoning, right? So just like you're kind of talking about, it was like they built a bunch of fun, engaging stuff that was pure spatial reasoning, which is great. But then everyone's asking, well, okay, so how do we do this standards-based stuff that we have to hit? So in the intervening 30 years, we've built a lot more stuff, which then dives and takes that same approach, that same neuroscience perception action cycle approach, but now puts it in a context of standards-based learning. And there are symbols, okay? But there are some ways. Yeah, I'm glad that you said in the other game, for example, there's no language there initially. Now, later on, we will have language. Later on, we will have symbols, but we generally start everything as visually as possible. So the accessibility, the entry point is purely through this visual spatial manipulation, and then gradually we'll add symbols and language, and we can talk a little bit about how some of that works. So I'm going to dive into again, a sequence of puzzles here. And this is in something that we call a puzzle talk, which basically is an opportunity, and we're going to have some links to a site of these that will be available for everybody later on. And I think one of the things we'll be sending out later will be a link with these. So these puzzle talks are something that are widely available. And we're going to look at something, I think this is from, let me see here for a second. Which grade level did I dive into? I know I need to go. Oh, and of course I can't spell, so the thing that I'm trying to find is not coming up. Hang on 1 second. No. Why is it? There we go. see. Okay, writing expressions. That was the one I was going to talk about. All right, so 5th grade, we're going to do something here that's very mathy and very standards based, but you're going to see how there's a similar sort of connection between what we're going to do. So it's going to be a puzzle again, but this time, this would be something where students are not on their individual computers. This would be something that a teacher would bring up at the front of the class. And you'll see down here, we've got teacher notes with questions for teachers to ask sort of built into the process here, because as I said, on the one hand, a big focus of what we do is how do we build materials that help students build their conceptual understanding? Another big focus is how do we then package that in a tool that allows teachers to make it relatively easy to deliver that? So this is that sort of second piece here. So teacher notes have all that there. So now you can see, okay, there's symbols, but this doesn't look too impossible. If I'm a 5th grader, I think I've got a sneaking suspicion of what I might need. You can see it's basically saying you need to put a number in the box, right? So give me a number that you think might want to go in that box. What do you think?
3.
3. All right. And where did that come from? I know this is obvious, but I'm just there's a point here to this.
It was all my years of playing Tetris.
There you go. Yes, exactly.
looking
Fantastic.
at
So cool.
Yeah. So that was,
and then the next, we got 3, and then what else?
and then 5.
5. Cool. Yeah. So basically, notice this is going from a visual, and we are doing the conversion of that into some symbols, right? So basically, we've got a visual that's telling us something. We're going to convert that into some symbols, and then Gigi crosses the screen. All right, fantastic, great. And all right, so now I'm going to move to the next puzzle. So this is a sort of curated, chosen sequence of stuff. And now it's like, ooh, okay, this is now a little bit different. So you'll see there's like a ramp, right? Like it's intentionally getting a little tricky, but notice it started very easily. There's not many 5th graders that are going to struggle too much with, okay, I get it. It needs to be 3 and 5. So what do we think here? This is a little bit trickier, but nothing too crazy. You can see we've got addition here, we've got multiplication, we've got 3 variables. We don't need to know that they're called variables at this point, but that's what they are. This is
going back to Cindy in the chat, like this is what we're using algebra for.
Right. Okay. Yes. We'll come to the, so actually, but yes, don't let me forget that at the end. That's a really good point there. But yeah, this is part of the learning of algebra. Absolutely. Yeah. So yeah. So okay. So what do we want here?
I'm popping 5 in there.
5, lovely. And then okay. So what do we got? We've got some kind of an array that's happening here. You can do it either way around, actually. So what do you want to go with here?
I'm going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. No.
Okay. Hey, let's try it. Let's go for it. And then multiplied by what?
2.
2. All right. So let's try this. So it's going to build me a 5. Okay. It's going to take the 2. It's going to make 7 copies of it. And it could just be that, of course, you were looking at it on my screen, might be a little bit small. But having seen that, what adjustment do you think you need to make here?
I need to subtract 1.
Yeah. So, okay. So instead of 7, it's going to be
6.
6 times 2, right? So again, notice we're able to get it wrong. If I'm a teacher and I'm doing this with the class and the class said 7 or they said something different, I don't have to tell them they're wrong. We just get to see it was wrong. We get to try it again. And as these things get more complicated, that sort of sense of like a safe space to try ideas and to keep looping around, that's really important, because it's that then encourages kids to actually try stuff. Like you want them to be in a position where they're going, oh, this was fun to try. It was actually fun to be wrong. It was cool. It wasn't like sit there embarrassed. It was like, oh, Gigi didn't get across the screen. All right, so now we're getting something a little funkier, a little bit different. And now you can see, oh, we're getting into some serious standards-based mathematics at this point. There's something very significant going on. You can see we've got 4 kind of stacks in the ground, but there's only 3 numbers up here. There's parentheses, there's multiplication, there's addition, there's all kinds of stuff happening. And I'm going to go to say some of the discourse questions here. because there's a real key thing, and you can see here, one of the critical discourse question is, what's a pattern we see copied again and again? How many times is it copied? So if I'm looking at this, do you see something that's copied, like a pattern that's copied multiple times?
Sure. It's like the single blocks plus the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 blocks, right?
Right. So there's a 1 and a 5,
Yeah.
and then that's copied twice. And again, we could talk about this all day. I want to speed up a little bit because we're going forever. But so basically, look, I've got 2 copies of 1 and 5. So this is a visualization of this distributive property. This is a way for kids to actually learn what this means, understand what this means. They don't have to be taught about this yet. They could learn how this works. And then when you're teaching stuff in class, suddenly the kids understand how parentheses work. They understand this mechanism. And we can see here it's going to take a 1, it's going to take the 5, it's going to put them together, and it's going to make 2 copies of the whole thing. And again, Cheeky gets across. And then, okay, last piece of this.
So, and Nigel, the dynamic here, as you said, I mean, this is a group activity with the teacher in the front,
absolutely,
and calling out to students. Is there also a function where they're doing this at home for homework and coming in, or give us the different
so basically
varieties of
so those 2 things. So basically, yes, there is a game-based learning system where kids do this one-on-one and get the feedback as they're going through a whole puzzle-based system. Absolutely. And that's been around for a long, long time. And initially, the design with that, the design concept of ST Math was that we would make puzzles, kids would play puzzles, and based upon this neuroscience way of doing things, and the teachers would bring that into the classroom and have those discussions. And that happened in about 2% of classrooms. So we realized we needed to make a tool to actually help bring this into the classroom. Like it's not that easy. And it was actually, especially because the way that the student system works, it randomizes the puzzles within certain parameters, which made it really difficult for teachers to then go and find specific ones they wanted to bring up for discussion. So we put them into this format then, what we call puzzle talks, where it makes it easy to have that discussion because the right puzzles are right there, right? You don't have to go and find it, and then the next time you go in, it's like, it's gone, it was here, but it's disappeared. So, so again, tools make things easier, right? So, so yes, kids can play this one-on-one, but also we have this that teachers can use in the classroom, and anybody can use this. This is not something that is behind the firewall. So now you can see we've got a more complicated version of the one that we were doing before, and we don't need to belabor the point here. I think, what have we got? 2 and 6 repeated 5 times, so it's going to be 5 times 2 plus 6. So distributive property, but more importantly here, kids are building that conceptual understanding through their learning by doing. And in all of these, we end up with a little bonus piece at the end, which hopefully will load. So now you can see, oh my gosh, there's symbols, right? There's a lot of symbols. But at this point, kids don't have to be afraid of the symbols because they know they can try stuff. And it's basically saying, hey, which algebraic expression could you use to build this shape? And it turns out that you could put whatever numbers you want to over here, but you ain't going to build this shape, right? So there's learning that will happen for the students as they do this thing. So I don't want to get too bogged down purely in sort of product specific things, but the sort of the bigger picture here is that is one way of that we have of bringing this problem solving process into the classroom. And what that's really doing then from a neuroscience point of view, and again, for people thinking about how to make this happen, regardless of whether you're using puzzles or using whatever you want to find, it's sort of the interaction of these 2 major learning sort of mechanisms that's so key. So we've got this perception action schema building, right, which is kids learning by doing stuff, making mistakes, figuring things out. And then very importantly, student discourse, which is very different from the teacher talking at the kids. This is a chance, and all teachers will recognize this. If you think about how much better you understand a subject after you've had to explain it many, 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 many different times, and when you've had to explain it different ways, your understanding increases literally through the act of you having to figure out how to explain it a bunch of times, right? So one of our learning mechanisms is not so much language on the way in, it's language on the way out. Like us as humans having to think about how to explain something to somebody else is actually a really good organizing sort of mechanism for our internal schema. Like it helps us fit them together. It helps us kind of go, oh yeah, how does that connect? And it helps you deepen and richen those connections sort of within your own brain. So kids doing, learning by doing, getting hands-on, figuring stuff out, and then kids talking about that. Like you see another very popular thing among building thinking classrooms, right? I'm sure many people are familiar with that work. And a lot of that, this whole notion about having stuff on vertical surfaces is because when it's upright and vertical, it means other people can see it and talk about it. So it's sort of promoting this idea that students actually need to talk about the work that they're doing. So this intersects a lot of different sort of thinking that's currently sort of in this education space, and especially in math education.
Yeah, let me
But
interrupt you,
basically,
Nigel. Sorry.
oh yeah, yeah. No, no.
A question coming in from the audience is kind of going back to the game a little bit. Will the game accept multiple correct solutions? I mean, will that be kind of
Oh, what
part
a
of the dynamic?
great question. Absolutely. So now, in some circumstances, of course, there are not going to be multiple correct solutions. So, like in this instance, this is the correct solution, right? Like you need to build an expression with this particular thing. But I want to go back to one where there most certainly are. And there are many like this. This just happens to be what I have in front of me right now. So where is it? Oh, yeah, here it is. Let's go back to this one as an example, right? So many people, I think, said, hey, what about the second one, the third one, and the third one? And oh yeah, it'll take anything you choose to throw at it. It will show any of the correct mechanisms. So if there are multiple solutions, then yes, you can absolutely use any of those. And in the Puzzle Talk version, the same puzzle loops round and round and round. So you can absolutely, like if you get it right one way with the class and you're getting a class discussion and someone has a different method, it'll just pop right back up like this. And you can go, okay, let's try something completely different. And I did say that there are any one of these can be used on, I'm going to go here just right now and go, yep, even this, any method, we can use any one of those buttons as the first move and it'll work, right? So there we go, totally upside down and around we go. 16 different ways of doing that one. That is a little bit of an anomaly. I don't know how many other puzzles we have that have 16 different possible correct solutions.
Right.
But it sort of, it speaks to a point and purpose there, right? Where in some things, obviously, there may not be multiple solutions, but where there are, one of the big drivers of our kind of design is this notion of mathematical honesty, right? We want to create models that are an honest reflection of the mathematics within. And actually, if you unlock how the model works in your mind, it's actually, if you like, sort of, giving you a deeper truth about how the mathematics works. So the last thing we want to do is sort of go, oh, it only works this way or it only works that way. I mean, sometimes some visual models do have limitations. That's just an inherent thing. Mathematics, with its symbolic sort of beauty, is unbelievably sort of infinite in the way that it can do things sometimes. So sometimes visual models can be useful as a way in, but they sometimes do have limits, which is why then you maybe need lots of different visual models about the same thing. Like we don't just use one visual model of fractions, for example. We have probably 8, 9, or 10 different visual models of way of thinking about fractions because there's such a complex topic and there's so many interesting different ways of visualizing them. So, but yeah, it's that kind of interplay of getting kids thinking and doing, making predictions, and then trying to explain that thinking. If you're doing that, if you're getting kids to engage with material, I love that you brought up this engagement piece. At the end of the day, if kids are not engaged, none of this is happening, right? None of this is occurring if there's no engagement. I will just tell a very quick anecdotal story, and I know time will run away from us, but it'll be fast. But when I first started teaching, there was a teacher who shall remain nameless, who I had to go and observe sort of as a, go and watch this guy teach, it'll help you, in my sort of first week there. And I was really impressed because he knew in September what the homework assignments were going to be on every day in April. He had them written on a board for the rest of the year. And at the time I was like, damn, that's really amazing. Now just think about that for a minute. That means he did not vary from his pace, from his thing. And you can imagine the class was literally, yes, him talking his way.
Was it laminated?
It wasn't. I think he'd written it with chalk. It was still chalk at that point. But yeah, I mean, that is sort of the antithesis of letting kids engage with the material, right? Literally the entire class was, I'm going to talk for the whole class time. You write it down. Here's the homework assignments. We're going to do this for a year. And not surprising, the depth of learning was not that rich. And it's almost like, even if the explanations are perfect, and I think this is something really critical to grasp here, it's not a question that the explanation might be wrong or bad. It could be the most brilliant, perfect explanation in the world ever. But if the kids aren't engaging with it, it's not going in, right? And it's that thing. If you're getting kids to engage, if you're getting kids to try and make mistakes and get things wrong, and then talk about that process and kind of do that in a loop, you are using neuroscience in the classroom, right? That, I think, is the big idea here, that yes, we have tools that we've built that can aid that and facilitate that process. But really, to say, I'm using neuroscience in my classroom, are kids allowed to make mistakes? What happens when they make mistakes? Do they get to discuss and talk about their ideas as they're developing them? If that's happening, that's a neuroscience-based classroom, right? That's something that is kind of working in an interesting way.
So another question coming in here, Nigel, so once those neural pathways are built, does it help in solving only similar problems or help in solving other novel problems?
What a fantastic question. I'm loving that question. Wherever that came from, that is a brilliant question, because what you're talking about here is transfer. And this is almost one of the biggest reasons for building a web as opposed to nodes. If you're learning stuff in isolation, one of the biggest problems is that learning it to some degree of depth in one area literally only helps you solve problems that look the same or are connected to that area that you've been doing them. I mean, I remember sometimes if I changed the font in my exam, it would throw some kids off the question, right? Like, that's how much they're used to seeing things in a particular way. When you have kids who have learned to kind of struggle, they've learned to figure things out, and they've basically learned connections between the ideas and made connections between the ideas in their head, they are now primed to actually sort of connect that to new ideas to solve novel problems. One of the things we do in ST Math, of course, is we continually hit them with novel problems. The slide, which I don't have here, which we literally talk about sort of on a grid of what you really want is kids using creative thinking to solve non-routine problems. If you can get kids thinking creatively about non-routine problems, that's rigor. That's rigorous problem solving. Stuff that when you're looking at the problem, if you're looking at it and immediately you're going, oh, okay, it's a multiplication problem, or oh, it's one of these problems. Well, great, maybe that's because you're super good at identifying all these different types of things. But ideally, you need to be confronted with problems where when you first try and do them, you're like, I'm really not quite sure what this is. I need to figure out what I even need to do. Now, that is being a mathematician, right? Now we had this question earlier about when do I use algebra? If all you've done is learn all these algebraic things like, okay, I can factor a quadratic equation, I know how to use a quadratic formula, great. But if you don't know how to use those things to then solve problems that don't fit in a neat little box, there is no point in learning that. You're not doing mathematics. You're not doing mathematical thinking. Mathematical thinking and the point and purpose of it really comes when you're actually able to transfer that learning into new situations. And I think that that's a great sort of way to sort of, So we talked, the title was here, Reversing Low Scores. So a couple of key points here. If kids build strong mathematical schema, their math test scores go up, right? That is just I know it's a revolutionary idea, but basically it's saying, hey, if kids understand math better, they do better on tests. And and this is not about test prep. This is the opposite of test prep. Test prep is like, okay, for the last week, great, you can practice some stuff, whatever, that's fine. But that's not going to fundamentally change a population's approach to doing mathematics. What we're saying is, we've seen this, I skipped over a slide earlier where we have data going back 30 years showing really significant changes in student populations' test scores from doing ST math and doing neuroscience-based approaches in the classroom, because we're changing the way the kids are actually thinking about mathematics, and that has profound effects. But it's not only test scores, right? Test scores are a teeny piece of the deal at this point in time, because while obviously those are important and they're a critical piece of it, the other thing that teaching and getting kids to learn in this way does, it doesn't just change their test score outcome, it changes their ability to think about why they're doing mathematics, because now they start making connections for themselves. They've learned that, oh, this is this connected thing. They start seeing connections. Whereas if you're teaching it in isolation, well, yeah, there's not a lot of point. There isn't much happening there. So I did have one, again, real quick on this, but NASA in 1942 put out a memo. This is before it became the space agency and when it was called something a little different. And they basically said, look, what we need is a bunch of human computers, as in people who can do mathematical calculations really fast. And in their memo in 1942, they said, but they don't have to understand what the results mean. So basically what they were saying is, we need a bunch of people coming out of the education system who can crank through math procedures, but we don't care whether or not they understand anything about what they mean. And that was a need of the education system back in the 40s. That got us to the moon, right? The big deal, right? We need 0 people today to be able to be good at doing mathematical procedures without understanding. There is no employer that needs that. And yet our system, obviously these things take time, right? We get stuck in culture, and our system hasn't culturally moved that far. We try, and it obviously has been a huge push over the last 20 or so years. But these days, what people need is creative thinking. They need kids to be able to think flexibly, transfer their knowledge. So if you're teaching in a way that kind of promotes that connectivity, now you're getting kids coming out of that process who actually have something that is of use today, right? So I know I'm rambling at this point, but
oh no, and I knew the toughest part of my job this afternoon would be to end the conversation. So many various aspects of where we can go and the importance of math and how it's being applied. The engagement aspect of it obviously is hugely important for our readers and our listeners and our audience members today who have hung through here for an hour. A few people have apologized because they are only given an hour to sit in for the webinar, so they've had to leave and go back to their classrooms. But hopefully they're bringing, Nigel, some of your insights and expertise back with them, and that again, our audience, hugely important jobs in terms of educating our nation's youth. So I want to thank you for this really informative presentation, and I'd also like to thank the audience members for joining us as well. As a reminder, you'll be getting an email within the next few days that contains a link to this recording. Also, you'll be getting a link to the slides. We have a few slides here that can point you to some other resources that Mind has provided for you as a result of being part of our conversation today. But again, thanks for participating and have a great day. Nigel, thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Really appreciate it.